And the idea of a man and a woman, for you have to also recognize and admit this, notice this, that for you, these are not purely clinical, biological, chromosomal facts. Primarily, when we say man and woman, you're not thinking about DNA and chromosomes. You will retreat to that justification if pushed into a corner. But that's not what you really think about when you think about man and woman. When you think of yourself as a man or as a woman, you're not sitting there and thinking about your chromosomes or your DNA. You have no direct experience of these things. These are things you learned long after the fact to justify your deep intuitions about what a man and a woman is, these categories. And these categories have much more important functional uses in society and in your own life than merely that of how they correspond to differences between chromosomes and DNA. You have ideas about how a man should behave and how a woman should behave. How a man should look, how a woman should look. How a man should dress, how a woman should dress, what kind of job a man should have versus what kind of job a woman is supposed to have, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable for each of them, how they should behave in social situations, how they should behave in bed, how they should talk. What you're allowed to be attracted to and what you're not allowed to be attracted to, depending upon how you identify yourself to be. What you think is valuable in a man versus what you think is valuable in a woman. Many of these traits are sort of opposite. When you see a strong, brash man taking sort of a leadership role in a situation, you might think, oh, that's good. That's how a man should be. And then when you see a woman doing that, you look at her and you say, oh, she's being weird. I don't like that. Where did you get these ideas, these standards and norms? You see, most people take this completely for granted and just assume, well, that's just how it is. Can't be otherwise. And it's pointless to question it. And to question it is just empty philosophy and word games. But it's not empty philosophy and word games. And if you study different cultures, you see that different cultures, and also throughout the history of time, that there were very different standards placed upon men and women. Even if we ignore for a moment just the purely physical differences of vaginas and penises, and we look more into the role that you play as a man and a woman in a society, in your tribe, in your family, and so on, these roles have been very different across time and across cultures. Different standards. The kind of length of hair that one is allowed to wear in a society, the kind of occupations that one is allowed to have, whether you're a hunter or a gatherer, or you're a doctor, or you're a teacher, or you're a nurse, right? And even just in the last 50 years, our own last generation or two, the generation you grew up in, we've seen significant evolution and changes in these standards and norms. And this is actually a deep reason why people debate and fight over this question so vehemently and so passionately, is precisely because this question is not purely physical or biological. If it was that simple, there would be nothing to argue over, and you wouldn't get passionate about this question. The reason this question inflames your passions is precisely because you need to fight to defend your ideas of what a man and a woman are. Because if you don't fight to defend them, they'll cease to exist. They'll dissolve. Culture and society will change, and then you will be left out. You will be left with the old ideas, not the new ideas. And see, this is very threatening because you spent your whole life using man and woman as a sort of an anchor in your life to ground your sense of self, your identity, and even your sense of physical reality. You've assumed these things are physical. So now, if someone like me comes along and starts to undermine that by sowing seeds of doubt in there, by starting to get you to question all these distinctions and boundaries as maybe not being physical, but being more mentally constructed, this can be very threatening to you. It threatens your sense of identity, and it threatens your sense of understanding of the world, because all of a sudden, the world you thought you had figured out doesn't make sense anymore. And then this leads you to ask deeper questions about like, well, Leo, but if that's a social construction, then what about science? And if that's a social construction, then what about mathematics? And if that's a social construction, what about something else? And then where does it stop? And usually people don't want to go all the way down the slippery slope. They just kind of cut the line off somewhere, and then they just stick to defending that line because that's what's convenient. That helps them to maintain their sense of reality.